Welcome to the deep dive. We are diving deep into a really challenging event today, pulling directly from a detailed article you sent us. Our mission, to try and understand the tragic crash of Ethiopian Airlines Flight 409.
Yeah, this is one of those accidents where, the initial speculation went one way, but the investigation, it uncovered something quite different. Happened off the coast of Beirut, January 25, 2010, stormy night departure. And devastatingly, it ended with the loss of 90 lives.
Right. And like you said, the initial talk immediately went to sabotage. I mean, given the region, that's maybe understandable.
It is understandable. What the investigation, based on this source material, really points to is a much more, unsettling story about what actually happened inside that cockpit. Absolutely. So today, we're going to walk through the factual sequence, look at the contributing factors the investigators found, again, based only on this source, and then maybe touch on some of the broader implications this accident raises.
Okay, let's get into it. What's the setup? What does the article tell us about Ethiopian Airlines back then?
Well, the source describes Ethiopian Airlines as, Africa's largest carrier. State-owned, long history back to 45, generally seen as pretty safe, pretty professional. They even had these in-flight safety officers on board, sort of like air marshals.
Right, which speaks to the regional risks, hijackings and things.
Exactly. It shows a focus on external threats.
But the article kind of hints that maybe that focus, it overshadowed other things.
It does suggest that. Perhaps unintentionally, this strong focus on security might have drawn attention away from, let's say, internal operational issues. The plane itself, an 8-year-old Boeing 737-800, very common aircraft. Well regarded.
Okay. And the flight, ET-409, Beirut to Addis Ababa. Early morning, like 2:30 a.m. local, January 25th, stormy. Plane wasn't full, half capacity, 82 passengers, 8 crew, 2 pilots, 5 flight attendants, 1 safety officer.
And that storm over Beirut is key background, definitely.
Yeah.
Now the crew, the source really focuses here. Captain Habtamu Benti Nagasa, 44 years old, loads of experience, 20 years, over 10,000 hours total.
Sounds very experienced.
Very. But here's the critical detail the source stresses. He'd only upgraded to captain on this specific type, the 737-800, less than 2 months before.
Okay, so experienced pilot, but new in command on this jet. What about the first officer?
Much less experienced. Aluna Tamarit Bian, just 23, only 673 total hours, 350 of those on the 737, with the airline less than a year.
Wow, big difference in experience levels there.
Huge. And the cockpit voice recorder, the CVR, picked up something interesting even before takeoff.
What was that?
They were chatting about dinner the night before. The captain actually jokes, what was in that food? Was there weed in it? The FO sort of laughs. They both admit they couldn't sleep well. The source explicitly flags this. Poor rest potentially leading to fatigue later.
Okay, wow. So late night flight, storm brewing, already tired. Not an ideal start.
Not at all. And things started going wrong almost right away, like on the ground.
Before they even took off.
Yeah. The first critical error, the source says, was setting the horizontal stabilizer trim.
Okay, explain trim again quickly, like balancing the plane for takeoff.
Exactly. You set it based on weight and balance, so it climbs smoothly. It should have been 6.9 units nose up. They set it to 5.9.
Why, does the source say?
It doesn't explain the why of that error, just that it happened. And the consequence wasn't small. The plane was out of trim. It meant the captain had to constantly pull back on the controls, physically, just to keep the nose climbing like it should. Added workload, right from the start, physical and mental.
So he's already fighting the controls as they take off. He starts turning right for the planned departure.
Right, and then ATC calls, another complication. Because of the storm, the traffic, they tell ET-409 to turn right to heading 315 degrees. Different from the plan.
Okay, so another change.
Yep, FO acknowledges, puts the new heading in the system.
So you've got the trim problem, now an unexpected turn, in a storm, in the dark. That workload is just piling up.
It really is. And the source suggests that while the captain is trying to manage this out-of-trim situation, maybe fiddling with the electric trim switches to fix it, he gets distracted. He fails to level the wings when they reach 315 degrees, lets the bank angle tilt past 35 degrees.
And that triggers a warning.
Yes, the loud bank angle warning blares in the cockpit. The plane rolls right past 315 through north. They're already 45 degrees off course.
Wow. Okay, so they overshot. ATC must have seen that.
They did. The controller sees the deviation, sees they're heading into weather. First suggests, then commands them. Turn left, now heading 270.
Turn west, basically, to avoid the storm. How did they handle that instruction?
This is where communication really breaks down, according to the CVR. The captain mishears. Say again. The FO asks about 210.
Confusion.
Total confusion. Controller clarifies again. Turn left, now heading to 70. But the captain, he's still wrestling with the trim. Source says he's actually over-trimmed now, pushing forward.
Pushing forward while needing to turn left, while still dealing with the original bad trim. That sounds incredibly difficult to manage.
Extremely. And again, he doesn't monitor the bank angle during the turn. Bank angle. Warning sounds again. They turn past 270 and fly straight into a thunderstorm. You can hear the roar on the CVR.
Oh, man.
And adding to the confusion, the FO hadn't actually put 270 into the flight director yet. It still showed 315. So the captain had no visual guide for how far to turn.
They're completely lost now. Of course, in a storm. What next?
It just escalates fast. They're flying almost south now, not west. Rolling more than 60 degrees left. Climbing really steeply because the trim is set so nose up. Bank angle, warning again.
It sounds like pure chaos. Total overload.
Pretty much. The captain, clearly swamped, says in Marika, okay, engage autopilot. Wait, is the right call? Right, reduce workload.
Yeah, let the machine fly. Did it work?
Autopilot never engaged. And the source calls this a critical failure in crew coordination. Why? Maybe the FO didn't hear? Or couldn't engage it because the captain was still manhandling the controls?
Which can prevent engagement.
Exactly. And crucially, they never talk about it. Like, hey, autopilot's not on, nothing. Communication just stopped on that point.
An ATC. Still trying.
Yeah. Controller repeats, heading 270. FO says, okay, or similar. But nothing happened. No turn.
Then the speed issue comes up.
Right. That steep climb, that high bank, the speed plummets. Dangerously slow. Captain shouts, speed! Then the stick shaker goes off, that violent rattling warning that the plane is about to stall.
Oh, wow. Bank angle warning. Now the stick shaker. What's the captain doing?
He shouts, what is that go around? Which go around is for landing. It shows how disoriented he was. FO acknowledges, pushes the throttles up, then pulls them back, then slams them forward to max power. Erratic.
So steep, slow, banked, warnings, blaring, confused commands.
And at 7,700 feet, going only 118 knots, bank 68 degrees left. It stalls, the wings lose lift, nose drops sharply, plane enters a steep dive.
They stalled it while diving. How does that even work?
Well, they stalled in the climb, the nose dropped, starting the dive. They weren't generating lift properly.
Okay, so they're diving, ATC still trying.
Yep, controller repeats the 270 heading. FO keys the mic, says Roger, Roger, but does nothing with the controls.
And the captain's inputs during this dive?
The source describes them as totally erratic, flailing, left yoke, right rudder simultaneously, inputs that fight each other, achieve nothing, just panic. Speed builds up rapidly in the dive, so the stick shaker stops.
Okay, speed increasing, diving, maybe they pull out.
Not in a controlled way. The speed is rushing back, and that nose-up trim is still set high. So around 6,000 feet, the plane just pitches up violently on its own, pulls out of the dive, but zooms straight back up into another steep, uncontrolled climb.
Oh no, here we go again. Climbing too fast, nose too high.
Exactly. The FO yells, speed is dropping. Captain says, okay, try to do something, but the FO, again, does nothing. Bank angle. Warning again. Captain goes, hold this thing. FO just says speed. Stick shaker starts rattling again. Total loss of control.
And the captain rolls it.
Violently left. Up at 9,000 feet now, banks at over 90 degrees, and it stalls again. Second time, nose drops. Even steeper dive this time.
Unbelievable. Is ATC still talking to them?
Yeah, controller, realizing the extreme danger, warns urgently. You're going into the mountain, turn right now. FO keys the mic one last time. Silence.
What was the plane doing in those final seconds? It sounds terrifying.
It was. From 9,000 feet, it entered this horrifying spiral dive. Pitched 48 degrees, nose down, banked 118 degrees left. They were pretty much upside down. CVR captures the captain crying out. Rapid, nonsensical control inputs just whipping the plane around. It rolls back towards level flight briefly, but the dive just gets steeper.
The speed must have been
immense, skyrocketing past 280 knots. Stick shaker stops, but now the overspeed warning blares. Loud noises on the CVR. Another cry, bank angle. Again, airspeed hits 407 knots, pulling over 4 Gs, 4.4 Gs. Way beyond the plane's structural limits.
Breaking point.
Yeah. The flight data recorder stops recording at 1,300 feet, likely due to the extreme forces or initial breakup. Less than 2 seconds later, impact with the sea. Just obliterated, all 90 people lost. A flash seen from shore. Wreckage found near Nama, 45 meters down. Worst crash in Lebanon's history.
Just a devastating, incredibly rapid loss of control. So the investigation starts. What did they find from the recorders and wreckage?
They recovered about 8% of the plane. Not much, but they got the crucial black boxes, the FDR, the CVR.
And they confirmed no mechanical failure.
Correct. Recorders and wreckage showed the plane was responding exactly as commanded by the pilot's inputs, however erratic. No sign of pre-impact breakup, except maybe right at the very end. No fire evidence on the recovered parts.
So the focus shifts immediately to the pilots, but this is where it got really contentious, wasn't it?
It really did. The source highlights this major disagreement. Ethiopian representatives, from the start, insisted it had to be an explosion or sabotage.
Yeah.
They seemed very resistant to the idea of pilot error.
Whereas the Lebanese and American investigators, looking at the data, human factors seemed the likely cause early on. That disagreement really affected the whole process.
Absolutely. It colored the entire inquiry. So the investigators' main job became figuring out why. How could these pilots, especially the experienced captain, get so confused so fast? Over just 4 minutes, the inputs went from normal to completely nonsensical. Every action seemed to make things worse. Deviations, banks, stalls, inversion, overspeed, all in about 3 minutes from that first turnover shoot. Good training records, no plane defect. It wasn't what happened, it was why.
And the answer pointed firmly towards human factors, specifically how the pilots were performing.
Exactly. It starts with that incorrect trim setting. That wasn't the cause on its own, but it massively increased the captain's workload right from takeoff.
Yeah.
Created this underlying difficulty he was constantly fighting.
And you add the late hour, the storm, the ATC changes. It's easy to see how someone could get overwhelmed.
Totally. The source describes it as task saturation, leading to loss of situational awareness for Captain Nagasa. Too much happening at once. Managing the trim, the climb, ATC orders, course changes, the storm, all at 2:30 a.m., relatively new type as captain. He fell behind the aircraft. You know that saying, don't let the plane get ahead of you? That's what happened. When he focused on pitch, bank went crazy. Focused on bank, something else went wrong.
Just couldn't keep up. The source also mentions subtle incapacitation. What exactly is that?
It's this complex and kind of insidious state. The pilot might seem okay physically, even responsive, but under stress, they lose the ability to process information correctly, make rational decisions. Symptoms include poor judgment, not reacting right, illogical choices, those irrational control inputs we saw. The investigation felt Captain Nagasa showed signs of this. Especially after the first stall, his actions just stopped making sense.
And what could trigger that kind of state?
The source points to possibilities, though it admits the mechanism isn't fully understood. Chronic fatigue, he'd been flying near maximum hours. Poor sleep, that dinner conversation, the wee joke suggesting maybe something disrupted his rest, and just the acute stress and overload of that specific situation. These aren't proof, the source is clear, but they are identified as potential contributors.
Another huge factor seemed to be the breakdown in how the crew worked together. CRM, crew, resource management.
Big time. CRM is all about teamwork, communication, monitoring each other, the captain calling for autopilot. That was actually good CRM trying to shed workload, but the FO didn't engage it. And crucially, nobody talked about it. The chain just broke. That failure to communicate was critical.
Which brings us to the first officer. It's really striking how passive he seems in those final minutes. Why didn't he do more?
That's a huge question the source grapples with. He seemed more aware sometimes, acknowledging ATC. So why not take control? Or at least shout warnings about the bank angles. The source raises one possibility, a comment from an instructor early in his training, apparently criticizing him for unnecessarily interfering and asking irrelevant questions. Maybe that made him hesitant.
So, worried about overstepping with a senior captain, even in a crisis.
It's a potential factor, the source suggests. Hesitation is understandable, maybe. But the source also says people who knew him were baffled by his total silence and inaction on the CVR at the very end. That part remains hard to explain fully.
And training also played a part. They had upset recovery training, but maybe not enough.
Right. Ethiopian Airlines did have URPT, upset prevention and recovery training, which was good for the time. But the simulators back then, they could only really handle basic upsets, recovering from deep stalls, steep banks, high-speed dives, inverted flight. The kind of thing that happened here was mostly just taught in the classroom. Theory, not practice.
So they knew the theory, maybe, but hadn't physically practiced getting out of that kind of extreme situation.
Exactly. Post-accident simulator tests showed recovery might have been possible, even late in the final dive. But realistically, with that training level, that loss of awareness, highly unlikely they could have pulled it off.
Okay. So the Lebanese final report concluded. Subtle incapacitation, loss of awareness, loss of control due to pilot inputs.
That was their finding, yes. Human factors.
But Ethiopian Airlines strongly disagreed.
Very strongly. They put out a rebuttal the source calls strongly worded. denounced the report biased, incomplete, lacked evidence. They stuck to their guns. Explosion or sabotage. They even accused the Lebanese of a conspiracy from day one to blame the pilots, pointing to early media leaks as proof.
And the source's take on those leaks?
The source says, yeah, the Lebanese maybe had poor media discipline, information got out too soon, but it wasn't a conspiracy. Human factors were just the most obvious explanation to experts seeing the data early on.
So what evidence did Ethiopia offer for their explosion theory?
They pointed to witness accounts of a ball of fire. But the source dismisses this, saying witnesses are unreliable in these situations. It was more likely the plane's lights reflecting off clouds or water.
Anything else?
They claimed missing bits on the CVR hid evidence, which the Lebanese blamed on a known tech issue with the chip. They claimed fire evidence was on wreckage they couldn't recover because Lebanon lacked funds. Though the source notes Ethiopia's offer to pay for more recovery wasn't followed through properly.
It sounds like the rebuttal was passionate, but maybe didn't align well with the physical evidence presented in the source.
The source is pretty critical, calls the rebuttal hypocritical, internally inconsistent, says it ignored evidence, didn't offer a coherent alternative based on the facts. It even speculates that maybe government pressure was involved to protect the airline's image. And it questions if the airline was fully upfront about pilot training during the investigation.
This whole dispute, the source connects it to a later Ethiopian crash, right? Flight 302.
It does. It draws a parallel. Looking at the 737 MAX crash, ET-302 in 2019, the source suggests a pattern of disputing investigations. With ET-302, there was a big fight with the U.S. NTSB over the investigation's scope, specifically about including pilot emergency training and maintenance issues.
And industry experts see a link.
According to the source, yes. Some experts believe the airline stalls investigations to avoid tough questions, citing ET-409 as the start of that pattern.
The article also touches on the airline's relationship with the Ethiopian government. That's sensitive territory.
It is. The source mentions accusations that the airline acts as a vessel for the whims of the political establishment. It cites specific reports like dismissing Tigrinya staff and a CNN report from late 2021 alleging planes were used to smuggle arms from Eritrea.
How does the source frame these?
It presents them as reported accusations and concerns. It raises questions about the airline's priorities, image, and politics versus a safety-first culture. It does note the airline aggressively denied those specific allegations. We're just reporting what the source itself discusses here.
It definitely adds another layer. This crash also plays into that big aviation design debate. How much control should pilots have versus the computers? Boeing versus Airbus philosophy, almost.
Exactly. The source contrasts ET-409 Boeing with Air France 447 Airbus. AF447 stalled partly because Airbus automation withdrew protections in a specific failure mode, leaving pilots to manually handle a tough situation.
And the argument for ET-409 is
that maybe, just maybe, ET-409 wouldn't have crashed in an Airbus, because Airbus systems have more hard protections against extreme inputs like excessive bank or stalls. The computers might have stopped the pilots from losing control so completely.
So more automation could have saved 409, but maybe that same automation philosophy contributed to 447. It's a trade-off.
That's the dilemma the source highlights. More protection might prevent a 409, but could create risks if the automation fails or confuses pilots, like in 447. Less protection gives pilots ultimate authority, but risks errors like 409 when things go sideways. It's a fundamental question, maybe still unresolved.
Wow, bringing it all together. It's just such a tragic story.
It really is. The core takeaway, reading this material, is that Flight 409 wasn't sabotage. It wasn't the plane failing. It was this cascade of human factors. Started small, that trim error. Not fatal on its own, but it set the stage by increasing the captain's workload immensely.
And that workload, combined with fatigue, the storm, the unexpected changes, it led to overload, loss of awareness. They got behind the plane, and their actions just made things worse and worse.
Precisely. It's a stark reminder of why understanding human factors is so critical. How tiredness, stress, too much information can overwhelm anyone, even skilled pilots. And how small errors, communication failures, training gaps for extreme events, they can snowball incredibly fast in aviation.
So thinking about why this matters to you listening, this accident really shows the challenges of managing any complex system under pressure. Could be flying, could be anything. It hammers home how vital clear communication is, how important it is to stay aware of the whole picture, and why training needs to cover the unexpected, not just the routine.
Yeah, and those wider points, the source brings up the automation debate, the need for truly independent investigations, how outside pressures might impact safety culture, They add even more depth to the lessons here.
It definitely leaves you thinking. Could more automation have prevented ET-409, or does that just shift the risk, potentially creating an AF-447 situation down the line? How much can we, or should we, rely on technology versus human skill and judgment, especially when things go wrong? Where's the right balance?